Hello and welcome to this revision session focusing on the AQA history topic of migration. In today's session we're going to be looking at Unit 1, and the idea of this series of videos is to make sure that you feel completely prepared for your exam on migration. Each of these videos, and we're going to do 4 in total covering the 4 different units. Each of these videos will cover a different unit, and they should last about 15 minutes each. Now that in no way can replace all of your other revision, so if you've got flashcards, if you've got revision guides, continue to do that as normal, but hopefully it can be a supplement and something that you can use maybe just before exams to refresh and go over, or as you're preparing over the next couple of days, weeks and months as you get ready for your exams. So as it is, we are now looking at Migration Unit 1, and the beauty of this topic, I think, is that it is so broad-ranging. So migration, if you want to understand human beings, you sort of have to understand migration. Migration means moving from one place to another, and human history is really all about migration. We believe that all human life is very likely to have originated from Africa, and humans left East Africa around 70,000 years ago, and the first people arrived in Britain around 4000 BC. Now, we don't need to go into huge amounts of detail for your migration topic because our topic starts in around 790 AD. And people migrate for many different reasons, and all the way through your migration topic you need to be aware of these reasons, which we call factors. And there are 7 that you need to know and focus on and almost categorize. Every time you come across an event or a person, you need to be able to categorize where and which factors they fit in with. So those are economic resources, money, government, sort of who's in charge, who are the leaders of a place, religion, we know about, war, ideas, so maybe ideas as we'll see in later units like social Darwinism, or ideas like the Renaissance might be a reason why people left, or even as we'll see in today's unit, the idea of revenge might be a reason why people migrated. Science and technology, and the role of the individual, when there is a certain person at some point in history who through their force of will and their decisions has caused people to have to move from place to place. So migration is a really interesting topic. As well, it's beautiful because of the fact that it's so recent to us. Although it starts in 790 AD, it ends with Brexit, which is your lifetime is my lifetime. It takes us all the way up to Britain's relationship with Europe. And when you sit your exam, you'll have 4 questions. So the first one is a source question that you'll have practiced many times before, and we will have parts of our video where we'll look at what type of practice questions you could do. First one, how useful is source A? Secondly, explain the significance of either a person or an event, and to answer that you might want to look at short-term and long-term significance. Question 3, explain 2 ways in which one group and another group are similar, or sometimes one event and a different event are similar. And then finally you will say, has a factor, so say has government or economic resources been the main reason for migration from Britain or to Britain, or for building empires? That sort of question, and that is your big 16 marker that you will answer. So we're going to go through in a sort of a whistle-stop tour all of Unit 1, just so that everybody feels confident in what comes up in this topic. And as we do so, as you'll see on our notes here, you'll see that every time we come across something that can be easily categorized, we're going to say which factor it could fit into. Now, I'm not going to read that out every time. You can notice that as we go through. So the Vikings, you will have heard of them and you'll have studied them pretty much all the way through school. They're invaders that come from Scandinavia that first invaded England when they went to Lindisfarne in 793 AD. And the Vikings stole from monasteries, particularly because they knew that the monks wouldn't fight back, and they took materials like gold and tin. They also came over because English farmland was easier to farm than in Scandinavia. In Scandinavia, there were parts that were very hilly or parts that were very sandy, and they knew that if they set up land in England, then they would be able to farm much easier. But another cause of Viking migration, as well as economic resources, is ideas, because the Vikings have the idea of primogeniture, where only the eldest son inherits land, and that means that you have to then have land. The land has to be taken by anyone who isn't the oldest son. So if you're the second or third born son, you have to go out there and seize land, go and invade places, and that is what Vikings did. And another factor that links is science and technology, because, as we can see from our picture on the right-hand side, the longboat is the Viking invention that allows the Vikings to travel over from Scandinavia to Britain, but also further afield. We think the Vikings went as far as sort of Russia, the edge of the Middle East, possibly even to North America. So the Vikings are a key part of Unit 1, as we'll see as well, with our next person, Alfred the Great, and the Danelaw. Now, Alfred the Great was an Anglo-Saxon, and he was king of Wessex from 871 to 899 AD. And the reason I've put king of Wessex is because he didn't control the whole of England. He controlled one of the kingdoms, which is Wessex. He was a cultured man who emphasised the importance of reading English and translated a lot of Latin texts into English. Wessex was the last kingdom that had not fallen under the control of the Vikings. You might have heard of the TV programme, The Last Kingdom, and that is related to Wessex. And Alfred's army defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in 878 AD. When Alfred the Great, who's seen as this great English leader, when he defeated the Vikings, he insisted on two things. One, that the Vikings, led by King Guthrum, converted to Christianity, but also he created this thing called the Danelaw, an area of England that the Vikings would have to stay in, and we'll see how that becomes relevant as time goes on. The Danelaw was in the north of the country, so anybody who was a Viking would be in that part of the country, and there were sometimes sort of purges and massacres for any Vikings that were found outside of that region. The Vikings, when they took control of the Danelaw, they brought a lot of Scandinavian influences, which are still felt today. An example of that is that we still use the word Thursday, which comes from the Viking god of Thor. Another Viking king, a Viking king that we will study now, is King Canute and his North Sea Empire. So again, thinking about Anglo-Saxons, who were the leaders in England, they were the tribe who were there before England was invaded by Vikings. Under King Ethelred, the Vikings were paid off with something called Danegeld to protect them from invading. It was sort of like paying off a bully in order to stop them from hurting you. That's what Danegeld was. And then in 1002, King Ethelred launched the St. Brice's Day Massacre, where he killed all Viking men, women and children who were found south of the Danelaw. And this turned out to be a horrendous mistake from Ethelred. Among those who were killed was Gunhilda, and Gunhilda was the sister of the King of Denmark, who is known as Sven Forkbeard. And this is where one of our ideas comes into play. As revenge, Forkbeard invades England in 1013. Now, Sven Forkbeard, the thing he's most important for in our study of the migration is that his son is called King Canute, and he became King of England in 1016, and he was seen as a fair and devout ruler, but he's most famous for our topic because he builds the North Sea Empire. As you can see from our picture on the bottom right, you have got England, Norway, Denmark and parts of Sweden that are economically strong and powerful, and they are all part of the North Sea Empire. He was very smart about how he gained power. He married Ethelred's widow, Emma of Normandy, and as a result of that, he became stepson of King Edward the Confessor, or who was to become King Edward the Confessor. So, skipping forward then, if you've studied Normans as another AQA topic, then you will know all about this, and that's part of the reason why this is a little bit briefer. But Edward the Confessor, stepson of King Canute, when he dies on the 5th of January 1066, there was a three-way battle for the throne, and with the main claimants being Harold Godwinson, who's an Anglo-Saxon, Harold Hardrada the Viking, and William Duke of Normandy, the Norman. Godwinson was chosen by the Witan to become king, but the other two claimants were deeply unhappy about this. So he had to battle Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and then William at the Battle of Hastings. Now Godwinson defeated Hardrada but then succumbed to William at the Battle of Hastings. So on the 14th of October, William defeated Godwinson's troops and he killed Harold Godwinson. And William was crowned king on Christmas Day 1066. And the Normans set about completely transforming England. They changed the feudal system of England, setting up a really clear system of control and replacing the land ownership with Norman leaders that William knew he could trust. He built castles and churches. You've got the beautiful Durham Cathedral as our bottom right picture there, to show not just his military power but also his religious devotion, and to link those two ideas together to show that he had God on his side by the fact that he would build castles and cathedrals often next door to each other. And as William was a Norman, French words like soldier and city, as well as names like Robert, Richard and William himself, became part of our English language. It is definitely clear to say that the Normans completely transformed our country of England. So, skipping forward then, and this is a whistle-stop tour, so we are moving very quickly. William's grandson is the next person we need to know about, and his name was Henry II. He became King of England in 1154, and he is the next person to build a huge empire called the Angevin Empire. Henry II built an empire which stretched all the way to the edge of Scotland, but didn't control Scotland, all the way down to the edge of Spain, but not controlling Spain. And to build this empire, Henry was really clever. He married a French Duchess, Eleanor of Aquitaine. He invaded Ireland in 1161, and he was treated as the Irish people's overlord. He was actually invited in by an Irish lord, or King Dermot as he was known. He was invited into Leinster, but then he continued to seize more and more power until he was seen as the Irish people's overlord. And that is an incredibly long-lasting effect. If you were to be asked a significance question, you could say that as a result of Henry II and the Angevin Empire, Ireland was under the control of England up until the 1940s. So that's how the Angevin Empire, as we can see, it's the yellow bits on our right-hand side, that's how it was built. And it was under Henry II's son, King John, that everything began to collapse. So his eldest son, Richard the Lionheart, was viewed as a great king, but when he died, King John, Richard's brother, replaced him. And under John, the Angevin Empire was lost. John spent a lot of his time out of the country. He was seen as greedy, seen as somebody who was not careful with the land of England and with the finances of England. So under John, most of the Angevin Empire fell apart, and the only remaining bits of that were England, Ireland, and the small region of Gascony, the wine-producing region of Gascony, which will become important when we get to our next part. John was so unpopular, you might have seen him, that he was in your Key Stage 3 lessons, he's forced to sign the Magna Carta to limit his powers in 1215 because his barons were so unhappy with the decisions that he was making. So, our final part of this unit then, in this whistle-stop tour of Unit 1 of Migration, is the 100 Years' War, named by somebody who clearly could not count because it lasts for 116 years. And part of this, the reason why it started, is because of, if we think about role of the individual, King Edward III comes into power and he's only 24 years old, and he wants to prove what a strong king he is by restoring the lands of the Angevin Empire. And France wants to take the last remaining part of what we now think of as France, which is still under English control, which is that wine-making region of Gascony. Now, there were some incredibly important victories for England over the course of that 116 years war, including the Battle of Agincourt. So the Battle of Agincourt has become really important in terms of English identity because 25-year-old King Henry V, he led a much smaller English army of 11,000 soldiers to victory against 30,000 French. And even though in the grand scheme of the 100 Years' War, it wasn't shown to be pivotal, it's helped to build this idea of England as an underdog nation, as a country, despite the fact even when we have been incredibly economically strong, even when we've been one of the most powerful kingdoms or countries of the world, we still sometimes like to see ourselves in sport and in politics as thriving as the underdog. And that can be traced back to the Battle of Agincourt of 1413. Despite victories in Agincourt, as we said, the French were victorious, led by Joan of Arc, who you might have heard of. She leads the French to victory, even after she's been burnt at the stake. France defeats the English, and as a result of the war, for our purposes, the thing we really need to know about the 100 Years' War is the consequences of that. So, as a result of fighting against France for so long, English kings drop French as the language of choice, and instead they start speaking English. You've got to remember that since the Normans with William the Conqueror, French has been the language that is spoken, and spoken by the landowning classes as well, the barons. But because of the 100 Years' War and this rivalry with France, that disappears and English becomes the language that we speak. We also start to see, and this idea will stretch all the way through to Unit 4, England now starts to see itself, now that it has lost its land in France, it now starts to see itself as very separate from Europe. We are no longer controlling lots of land across Europe, and we are quite distinct from places like France. And that idea of sort of English separateness, or maybe even English superiority, can be stretched all the way through, you could argue, to the Euroscepticism that would lead to us rejecting the euro in 1999, and to Brexit, the Brexit vote of 2016. So if you want to practice some of this stuff, if you're thinking, right, that's all well and good, I think I've learned that, but I need to apply it now, I've got 2 practice questions here. You could come up with your own using the question stems, but here are 2 that you could use that have been used on past papers before. The first one, explain the significance of Alfred the Great. It's an 8 marker, so you need 2 paragraphs ideally. In the first one, you could look at the short-term impact of him. So how did he change things in his own lifetime? You could mention the Battle of Edington. You could mention things like him leading the Vikings to have to convert to Christianity. In the long term, you could talk about Danelaw, and you could link that to what we saw with the St. Brice's Day massacre, and with Sven Forkbeard taking over as king after that. You could talk about the importance of the English language, because remember, he was somebody who thought it was really important. He even translated Latin texts into English and encouraged his people in his kingdom to do so. So we could link that idea forward to the importance of English, maybe even link it to the 100 Years' War we've just been discussing. And then you could have a go at practicing at least 1 or 2 paragraphs of the main factor question. So question 4, your last one, says, have economic resources been the main reason for migration to and from Britain? Now, when you do this topic, as we'll discuss in later videos, you need to cover 3 different time frames. So you wouldn't want to do a full essay only about stuff from Unit 1. You need to give examples from Unit 1, 2, 3 and 4 in an ideal world, or at least 3 of those. But maybe you could just do one paragraph where you say economic reasons has been a cause of migration to and from Britain, for example, and then use things like why the Vikings came to Britain, or do things like why the Angevin Empire developed over time. Okay, so best of luck with that, and hopefully that has been useful in terms of developing your knowledge of Migration Unit 1, and I will see you back for our Unit 2 video very, very soon. Good luck. Bye-bye.